What's happening, everyone? It's Jeff. Coming up, special episode on the um, Second Chance Podcast, Halloween edition. And we're putting this episode out in honor of LAPD Detective Thomas C. Williams. And his daughter, Susan Snow, is on this episode. And Susan now, she has a book, she speaks professionally, and she has an amazing, very impactful story about losing her dad um, many years ago in while he was on the job as a detective to LAPD. And she and I goes through about an hour of hard conversation. We pause and then it'll come back on because we couldn't get everything in one setting. So it's a long episode, but man, I'll tell you what, if there's ever a time I would say for you, if if you can put a seatbelt on to hang on, Susan will absolutely move you. And it's a great conversation. If you're in law enforcement, even more bigger listen. If you're listening and you know someone who's in law enforcement, if you know someone who's experienced loss in law enforcement, it's a damn good episode to send to them. Um, I'm learning as I go through this. I appreciate everybody's support, but I just wanted to put this one out in honor of LAPD Detective Thomas C. Williams, um, who died October 31st, 1985, while picking his son up from elementary school. I just wanted to send this out in honor of him and in support of her and her family as they continue to um, recover and just grow from a loss that happened so many years ago, but has been so impactful in their lives every day up until this moment. And I just want to send a lot of love and a lot of prayers and a lot of thoughts over to their family. And just let them know that, like my friend Kenny Mitchell says, you're never alone. And thank you for listening. Let me know what you think. Make sure you share this one. All right, team, it's Jeff with the Second Chance Podcast with Jeff Robertson. And this is an episode that I've been anticipating. And Susan Snow's up on my podcast here. She and I was just chatting. I've spoke a little bit about my law enforcement days and the things and all the things that I got to do and all the cool stuff and the people that we helped along the way. And I've spoke to that a lot, but this is the first. That was single Jeff, and today I get to hear this um, side from someone who was on the family side of law enforcement. So today we had the honor of speaking with Susan Snow, a keynote speaker and author whose life took a tragic turn on Halloween night in 1985 when her father, LAPD Detective Thomas C. Williams, was ambushed and killed in the line of duty. Susan's powerful journey from unimaginable loss to resilience has become a beacon of hope for those grappling with trauma. In her book, The Other Side of the Gun, Susan shares her path to managing PTSD, fighting vulnerability with courage, and embracing love with forgiveness, all without falling into the trap of victimhood. Her story is one of strength, healing, and commitment to helping others navigate their own journeys through grief and recovery. Susan, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, I'm excited. Like I said, we were talking a little bit briefly for everyone. As a police officer, especially a single police officer, you never get to see that family dynamic. And I was around people that had wives and kids and all those things, but it never registered with me because I was that young, just full of energy and very little cares about any of that stuff. So I'm excited to just learn more about you and what you do. And can you walk us through the moment you learned about your father's passing and how that impacted your life trajectory?
Oh, sure. Well, strap yourself in because it's.
Seatbelt. That's right. I've told people put your seatbelts on. People.
Put your seatbelts on. I was 17 and I had a 6-year-old brother at the time. Um, my dad, I have to give a little background. So my dad he was a detective. He was actually a robbery homicide detective with North Hollywood Division in LAPD. Um, and that morning of Halloween, he testified against the man who he was the lead detective on his case. And it was a robbery ring kind of situation. Um, that man was actually on parole during his trial. So um, that day, I wanted to go to a party. I was a typical teenage girl. I wanted to go to a party with my friends. I had talked to my dad. He was very nervous that day about going to court, and he never usually was that way. So it was kind of odd seeing him like that. And we had gotten to a little argument that morning because it was school night, and he was your typical dad, and he was very strict, and he said, nope, it's a school night, you're not going to a party. I wanted to go with my boyfriend at the time, and so we left it at that. He went off to court, I went to school, and all day I kept planning, like, okay, I'm going to clean the house, and then it's going to get dad to say yes, and I'm going to be able to go to this party. And I was in a really great mood, right? My mom was the first to come home, and the plan was my mom came home, my dad went to my brother's school to pick him up, and then he would be home. And my mom had come home, she was taking her costume off from her party at work, and I was putting mine on. And that's when the phone rang. And being the teenager, I thought, who's calling my parents, right? So it's got to be for me. So I ran across the room, and I picked up the phone, and it wasn't from me. It was a lady from my brother's school, and she said that there had been a drive-by shooting, and my dad was involved. And as soon as my mom saw that I was on the phone, she came around the corner, and I handed her the phone immediately. And as I watched her demeanor, I realized that it was bad. She got off the phone. She looked at me and said, we're going to the school. So we drove to the school. Neither one of us said two words to each other. I knew in my gut that it was not good, that it was bad. But I didn't know what I was going to come upon. When we got to the school, the way that the school was set up was uh, there is a parking lot that's like in the middle of the school. We parked in the parking lot, and the kids at the end of the day got let out on the back side of the school. So that's where my mom and I headed towards. As we were walking, we saw police officers coming towards us, and they had tears in their eyes. And the sky was lit up with all of the units that were there. And there was an ambulance that was sitting in the street. And my mom and I both kind of glanced over and saw my dad's truck. So we started to run that way. As we got closer, we realized there was glass on the ground, and we rounded the corner, and there he was. And he was covered up. And I watched my mom drop to her knees and scream. And I stood there in the street, not being able to comprehend what I was seeing. And so what I ended up doing is I started to hyper focus on that ambulance. And I couldn't understand why nobody was helping him. Because in my childlike brain, I couldn't put two and two together. I for what I was seeing and what the reality was. There were two officers that came up to us and pulled us aside, and they escorted us back into the school and put us in an office. My mom got taken away by one of the detectives. I had no idea where my brother was. I had no idea if he was hurt. I had no idea what he had seen. And as I was sitting at the chair, just trying to wrap my head around what was my life now, I didn't, I still kept questioning why nobody was helping him. I heard two ladies talking, and they worked at the school, and they said, one of them said that my dad was deceased. And when I heard that, it was like the sky cracked. And I just wanted to run so far out of that room, as far as I could go, because I wanted to run away from this nightmare. But my body, my physical body, felt like it was full of cement and I couldn't move. And a little bit after that, my mom came back and she said, I'm sending you with a neighbor. Now, I understand, like, I know that I wanted to run out of that situation, but at the same point, I was a child and I wanted to stay with my family unit. I needed to be with my mom and my brother. Um, but instead, I didn't get that. I got sent to a neighbor's house. So as you can see, I physically saw my dad's death.
So, for context, is your dad picking up your brother at school?
Yes, he was picking
Okay.
up my brother from school. Mm-hmm.
He's picking up your brother at school, and he's ambushed there. Um, no, your dad was the intended person. No one else was
Yes,
hurt. Just your dad, right?
yes, it
Um,
was the guy that he had testified against had planned this for months, and him being out on bail gave him that opportunity to lay in wait. My dad's last heroic thing that he did here on earth was to save my brother's life
mm.
and tell him to duck down in the truck because he knew what was coming. So my brother did not get hurt physically, mentally, and emotionally, absolutely.
So, for context and just knowing a little bit, just enough, when you mention North Hollywood, it is synonymous with you can I can with recall immediately a significant shootout. If you Google North Hollywood shooting, you're going to find this. So from during this time, uh, if my memory serves me right, this area is a pocket that's it's known for its bank robberies and its robberies, and there's a lot of robbery activity if my memory serves me correctly. So this is not it's the criminal element in this area is this is their thing. So there was all sorts of gangs that were operating during this time and bank robberies and things along those lines just in North Hollywood in itself. So your dad has been tasked to investigate something that is um, a lot of areas when they have a robbery unit, it's not to the volume and it's not to the scale that it is in 1985 up until I think it's 95 maybe. When the North, I can't remember the exact year of the North Hollywood shooting. But just I'm putting that out there for just so everyone kind of
Context.
gets an idea of
Mm-hmm.
what's going on in just this
Mm-hmm.
particular area during this time.
Yeah.
So tell me, before we move forward, tell me a little bit about your dad, the police
My
officer.
dad.
Is he? When did he get to be a police officer?
Oh my gosh. Well, he was on the force for 14 years when this
Yeah.
happened. Um, and, honestly, like I watched him work his way up um, the ladder. So but when he became detective too, I, um, I just had a false sense of security, as a kid. When he was on the streets, it was scary. Like he could get hurt. And when he became a detective, that all kind of fell aside. I didn't have that paranoia about my dad's safety. Um, and as far as being a dad, oh my gosh, he was an incredible human being. And anyone who has ever known him would agree with me. And I talk about this a lot. He was a very present father. So when he was with you, he was present enough to make you feel like you were the most important thing in that room. Whether that was who he worked with, who he trained with. I hear stories upon stories upon stories of people who, went to the academy with him or trained underneath him or just worked with him in general, who were like, he had this, where they called him the cop's cop.
Yeah.
He really took his job with pride, and he really believed in the public service thing, like to protect and to serve. He lived that. He lived that every day and respected all people. And that's how he raised me to be. So,
That
um,
protect and service, I think it's the LAPD's mantra. That's their
yeah, it
thing.
is. And he took it very seriously. Um, and I was really prideful then, but I'm even more prideful now because I get to hear the stories from people, and it was really interesting to hear the behind the scenes of my dad, um, because even when he died, it was a pretty big deal. It was the first time in the annals of LAPD that an officer had been ambushed and
Mm-hmm.
assassinated for doing his or her job. And so, there was a lot of, after I was able to go home, they did not catch the guys for 6 days. So for 6 days, I had
Oh
an
wow.
enormous amount of police presence in my neighborhood, in my yard, in my backyard. We had the helicopters. I had bodyguards. Um, it was because not only did we have the police presence, but we also had the media presence. So it made it a little bit difficult just because we never got to grieve privately. And that was difficult.
Um, did could you false sense of security been your dad going from work in uniform where you see all the things to where he's in plain clothes and he's now you don't see that gun, you don't see that badge. He's probably where maybe back then they were real big on coat and tie.
Yep.
Um, I can give you a side of maybe the other side of it is the day my first plainclothes assignment was August 1st, maybe. It was hot outside. And I remember going out to the car that I had been assigned, and we had taken cars, and I'm going out to get in my car to go to my new assignment. It's the first time in 2 years or so that I haven't wore uniform, belt, all the stuff, vest.
Mm-hmm.
And I went outside, I got cold because I'm used to wearing all
All
this
this
stuff. And
stuff.
I remember when you said that, it brought back, because I used to tell that story. I'm like, that's for my first day on the job in plain clothes, man. When I walked outside, it's hot, it's humid, it's all the things. And I walk out and I'm like, oh, I get like a little chill because I'm like, man, I'm not used to
Yeah.
walking out that back door like that. So
Yeah. And the other side of that too was that I knew that he came in after the fact.
yeah.
So the crime had already been committed. It wasn't him uh during the crime. And so that's what gave me a little bit more sense of false sense of security, is that he was coming in after the fact, after the crime was committed. um the other side of my dad was, and I talk about this a lot, especially with law enforcement, because compartmentalization is something that comes with the job. And I watched my dad do it for years. And that's why I talk about mental health in law enforcement and how important it is. Because I watched my dad struggle with it, and not in a negative sense. Um, but for instance, we'd be sitting there having spaghetti dinner, and he'd be talking about the dead guy that he just found, and he'd been gone for 2 or 3 days, and he'd describe like what he looked like, and I was like, Dad, I'm eating a spaghetti dinner, like, can we not, but for him this is normal talk,
Yeah.
right? This was a normal day at the office. The only time that it really hit him hard was when kids were involved, but other than that, like, you know the compartmentalization kind of makes you like, you don't know, it's hard for you to decipher what is your normal day-to-day talk and you know how you're supposed to talk. So, and there's nothing wrong with that, it's just a par for the course. But when I talk about compartmentalization, I talk about mental health, I feel like there's been so many years, and you probably have heard this in the past. And I know I had conversations with my dad, even at 17, talking about the fact that if you were in a place where you needed help and you sought out that help, you were chastised.
Yeah.
You were looked at as being weak.
Especially in 85, Susan.
Yeah, for sure. Right. And
Especially in 85.
so I feel like the conversation needs to be to get rid of that and really open your mind to, we are all human, and you can only see what you see and deal with what you deal with on a daily basis, but you have to take care of yourself. And I feel like the more we have the conversation and take the stigma away and know that it's not weakness, it's actually strength to be able to go out and get rid of. I had a police officer that I had spoke with, and he says we need to get rid of the machismo bullshit. Excuse my French,
Hey, good.
um, because it doesn't serve us. It does not serve us, and we need to learn to be a little bit more vulnerable and sit back and say, you know what, I'm not feeling it. I'm overwhelmed or whatever, because in past, in looking at um, how this affects people, is you have drug use, you have alcohol use, you have divorce that's rampant, all of these things. And I feel like if people in law enforcement and first responders take the time to work through their stuff, um, they can have a healthier them, right? Their lives can be healthier. They can have the tools. They can learn the tools to be able to deal with, because you have post-traumatic stress. You have it. You have it. And as human beings, anytime we're in a trauma situation, that's what happens. And if you look at it, post trauma is hurting your brain, it is damaging your brain. So if you learn to manage it by having the tools from therapists and, whatever it is that you seek, coaching, whatever, um, not only will you be a healthier you, but you'll be able to do your job at a high level. Because let's face it, if you're dealing with all this trauma, and you're not dealing with it, I should say, and you're compartmentalizing, um, it can come out in behaviors, right? And it might not end well. Um, and we see it a lot. And I am hoping to put the message out that you're not alone, for one. But you are the only you have, right? And if you don't take care of yourself, and your mental health is just as important as your physical health. And like I said, it's not a weakness. It's a strength. And I meet officers a lot that have gone through something traumatic. I was honored to be I was a keynote speaker last September in San Diego for the LAPD delegates.
Ah.
And I was one of two keynote speakers. The other one was a gentleman out of Rochester, New York. Denny Wright was his name. He has been on the force for 30 years, and he walked his beat every day. And he got a call from a mom whose son was having a mental break. So he knew this family. He went, he saw the kid, and he said, I just want to get you help. I'm not here to cause any problems. And a little bit later, a scuffle ensued, and this kid grabbed a kitchen knife and stabbed Denny
Mm.
in the eye. And Denny sustained 30 stab wounds. He's blind in both eyes. He's still on the force. But what he said when he spoke was so important, because he said, in the 30 years, this is the first time I've taken the time to work on my mental health. And he was the one that said, get that machismo crap out of here. Like, it does not serve us. It does not serve us. He said, it took this to happen to me for me to realize that I should have been handling my mental health a long time ago, because I would have been a better husband. I would have been a better parent. I would have been a better cop. I would have been a better whatever, right? Because I was
Yeah.
taking care of my mental health. And he had that regret. But now he has that feeling of, okay, I'm doing it now, right? It's not too late. And I'm finally taking care of myself, and that is the most important thing. So he said, and you hear it a lot, it's hurt people, and hurt people who heal help other people heal.
Yeah.
So he was incredible. I had to go on after him, which was unbelievable, because we watched his body cam
Oh.
footage, and it was
Oof.
brutal. And then he spoke, and I was crying, and I thought, I have to follow this guy? Are you kidding? And then I'm thinking of the delegates, like, now strap yourself in, kids, because now my story is coming.
Yeah. So that's a fire hose of
Yeah,
info. Just
yeah. But it's life.
yeah.
And it's, when you take that oath, and that there's danger out there, and there are days where you may not come home. Um, and that's the most important thing. It's like, you want to surround yourself and do things for yourself that is going to serve you. Compartmentalization, pushing it away. I talk about emotional masks, like putting on a mask that says, this isn't affecting me, I'm totally fine, whatever, is not helpful. It's something I did for many, many years. I got really good at it too. Um, that's not healthy. So I will tell you, initially, after my dad was killed, I didn't know anything about therapy. First of all, it was the 80s.
Yeah.
There was no talk of mental health.
Mm-mm.
There was very little known about PTSD. In fact, back then it was called shell shock,
Yeah.
and it was attributed to people coming home from war. Um, so there were no resources for kids either. And that was a real struggle for me. Um, Being 17, I had to lean on my boyfriend at the time, who went through all of this with me. He was 19 years old at the time. And he was there with me that night, and he was with me through everything. And I at the time was going through all the things that PTSD gives you, which is I had severe depression, I had suicidal ideation, I and I didn't know what it was. I had no idea all of these emotions and these things that I was feeling and experiencing. Um, I didn't know how to verbalize what was going on with me. I had anxiety, panic attacks, because, like I said, my dad was my sense of security, and now he's gone. And so LAPD came to my mom, and the advocate came to my mom and said, "We want to pay for all three of you to have therapy separately." And so my mom said, "You're going to go to a therapist." And at the time, it was like, you pushed me in a direction, and I just went in that direction because I lived in a fog and I didn't know how to advocate for myself. So I did. I went. And in hindsight, I feel like the amount of trauma that I had sustained, he was not educated enough to handle it. And again, like I said, there wasn't a lot of talk about PTSD back then. So I don't know if he just wasn't trauma competent or what, but he definitely kept our sessions very, very shallow.
Yeah.
And all he wanted to talk about was my relationship with my mother, which was broken, um, my relationship with my brother, and my boyfriend in school. And that's it. And he never asked me what that night did to me. He never asked any questions that would allow me to be vulnerable and start to tell him this stuff that was going on. So every session, I would say to myself, today's the day. Today's the day is going to help me and I'm going to feel better. And it never happened for an entire year. And at the end of the year, he said, "Susan, you're a well-rounded young lady. You're going to be fine for the rest of your life, and I don't need to see you anymore." And I literally walked out of his office thinking, "Oh my God, I'm done. I'm cracked. I'm crazy. I'm going to have to live like this for the rest of my life and figure this out myself because even a professional can't help me." And so what I ended up doing is I started listening to other people around me who would say things like, "Oh, you're so brave. You're so strong. You're so
Oh,
this." That was my mask. I wore that. So anytime anybody asked me how I was doing, that was my answer. "I'm fine. I I'm doing great. I'm doing great. I'm fine." And I got really good at that. And I was living in fight or flight. um I didn't know how to function normally. Um and I thought that was going to be just my normal. That was going to be my normal for the rest of my life. It wasn't until I married that boyfriend, by the way. We've been together 39 years. Um, we had 2 kids and we moved to Colorado. I was working as a hairdresser at the time, and I was working at a salon that was close to Littleton, Colorado. And we moved in 97, and in April 20th of 1999 is when the Columbine school
yeah.
shootings happened.
Yeah.
And I was working on clients. I had gone and taken a break and went into the back room, and I turned on the TV and all the coverage was on. And I had a visceral reaction.
I bet.
I started to panic. I turned white. My coworkers had no idea what was going on with me because I never told my story. So they were confused because I wasn't old enough to have kids at that high school, and they knew I didn't live anywhere near there. So they were really confused as to why I was having this reaction. And so was I. Because remember, I was told I was going to be fine for the rest of
Fine.
my life.
Yeah.
So no one told me about flashbacks. Nobody told me about, any of that triggering me having all of these reactions. So I did what I normally do, and I put that mask back on. And I went out, I finished my job, I finished my clients, and my clients were upset. Everyone around me was just devastated. But I had this mask on. It was impermeable when I was at work. Like, you know, um, the minute I walked out the door to drive home was a different story.
Yeah.
I started to spiral. The suicidal ideation came back. It was terrifying because now I'm a mom. And for 2 days, my husband just watched his wife spiral. And at the second day, he met me at the door, actually. And he said, "You have two choices. You either get help or I'm putting you in a hospital today." And so I said, "Okay, I'll go get help." And I went to a physician, and the physician put me on antidepressants because that's what they do.
What they do.
And then he said, "I want you to make an appointment with this therapist," and handed me a business card. And I literally laughed in his face. I said, "Oh, come on now. I tried therapy 14 years ago and it did nothing for me. What makes you think this is going to do anything?" Like I'm broken. And he's like, "You have no choice. You've got to do this." So I made an appointment, and it was the best day of my life because this woman that I went to specialized in PTSD,
Yeah.
especially with severe trauma. And within the first 3 minutes to 5 minutes I was talking to this woman, I described to her what I went through at 17 and what I was currently dealing with. She looked me in the face and she said, "Susan, everything you've gone through since you were 17 is normal because you have PTSD." And she said, "But what you need to know about PTSD is it's not something that goes away. It's something you learn to manage." And I was like, "Oh my gosh." I always describe it as like the sky opened up and rainbows
Yeah.
shot out because
Well,
I wasn't
but
crazy.
and you're like, where you been? Where you been?
Right.
I've been looking for you. Where you
Like, I
been?
have been in fight or flight for so long. I don't know what to do with myself. And by the time I saw her, I had sleep deprivation. I mean, I was just going through it. Um, and she was amazing because I was so great. It was so great to be able to find my person, right? To find the person that
Yeah.
I know that was going to be able to guide me through my healing, and that I wasn't crazy. I wasn't nuts. I wasn't cracked. I wasn't broken, you know? Um, I was a little broken, but I was going to be able to heal from that brokenness. Um, and she knew she had her hands full, man. She knew. She's just like, we're gonna attack this one thing at a time because you've got a lot of things going on.
Yeah.
um the original, the one thing that she said, "We're gonna do this in baby steps." So we attacked the no sleep thing, and she asked me, like, "Why is it that you're not sleeping? What is happening physically to you when it's bedtime?" And I said, "My brain turns on and I go to a very dark place, very dark. And it terrifies me enough where I don't want to shut my eyes." And so she said, "Okay, well, here's what I want you to do. I want you to take, so you, what we're going to do is we're going to do journaling." And I was like, "What?" And she goes, well, journaling, you're going to journal, and you can journal on paper, or you can do it by art, or you can do it through music, whatever, whatever you're into. And I've always been a writer. So I said, okay, fine, I'll try this. I really was so skeptical. I was like, how is this going to help me? Seriously? Really? Okay. So a little obstinate. I was like, this isn't going to work. This is not going to work. So what I ended up doing is I took a pad of paper and I kept it near my bed. And right before bed, I would write down everything that was in my head. Everything. Just get it all out on that paper. And I did it for 2 days straight. And you know what happened?
You wrote a book.
I slept like a baby. And then
That's
I
really
had to
good.
admit to myself that this actually freaking works.
Yes.
So when I went and saw her, she's like, okay, what happened? And I told her, I'm like, all right. You were right. I'm just like, I put out the white flag, like, okay, all right. You know what you're doing. Okay. I get it. So we started with that, initially, and kind of built up from there. We attacked the, anxiety, and then, and then eventually it led me to doing EMDR work, so the reprogramming of the brain,
Oh,
um, with
powerful stuff.
electronic
Yeah.
stimulation. Yeah. So it's been a
Susan, with
journey,
this,
man.
I was, I was, with all that journaling, but was that the inspiration for your book, The Other Side of the Gun?
It really was, and it wasn't.
Yeah.
Um, Honestly, like, I didn't write my book till I was 50 years old. I'm now 55. Took me 4.5 years to write it. And the reason it took me so long is because I really had to dive and relive,
Mm,
and I had repressed memories come up. It And I feel like all the work that I had done in the past with all the mental health that I've done allowed me to be able to go down that journey of writing, because I had the tools. On the days where I was just overwhelmed, like I had nothing left. I'm a realtor now, and on top of being a coach, and I just didn't have it, and so I had to learn to give myself grace on those days where you're like, I'm depleted. I got nothing, you know. I had to sit in that with no guilt and say, okay, I need a refresh day. And so I would do something that gave me joy. And the next day was a different day, right?
yeah.
So I always wanted to write a book, but for goodness sake, I didn't know the first thing about writing a book. So
Yeah.
that in itself was a little intimidating. Um, But at 50, I drew the line in the sand. I said, I am right where I should be mentally to do this. So I'm going to do this because, for a couple of reasons. One, from that night on, um, I've always, and so be it. All the focus has always been on my brother. He was there, he witnessed it.
Mm,
The focus was on my mother. Um, I kind of got pushed aside.
yeah. I can see
And
that.
so people in their minds were making up their own stories about my life,
Yeah.
right? And um, I wanted, it was time for me to tell my story. And I wanted to tell it in a way where I was giving people hope, that I was, because there's still a lot of law enforcement who are still, sad, angry, all the things about what happened to my dad. And I was hoping that if they saw me and they saw the resiliency side of me, that maybe it would allow them to heal a little bit themselves and see that I'm doing okay. And that they can let go of their anger and they can heal from this. And so that was my purpose. It became, and I had a lot of fear about writing this book, let me tell you. There was a lot of fear around it. There's a couple of things. There's the fear that it was going to end my relationship with my mother. It was going to end my relationship with my husband because we've gone through a lot in the 39 years. And I did write about what we went through, and my safety because the men were still in prison. Um,
You
and
touched
so
on something I wanted to ask you
the
about,
safety
Susie.
part.
Well, no, the safety part, but you're you're teeing me up here. I told you this was going to tee me up. How did this? You're talking 39 years, same fella. Let's touch on that because that's we're going to find that commonality sometimes with our audiences. How did your this constant state of fight or flight shape that relationship with him and y'all struggle? It is a struggle or positive, whatever that looks like. But how did your constant state of fight or flight shape your relationships daily before you found um, your new therapist and your new doctor that ultimately helped propel us to where we are now?
Yeah. Well, I feel like, and we talk about this a lot. I feel like, now, first of all, in the very beginning, I mean, we'd only been dating 3 months, so my dad was killed. Most 19-year-old boys would have hightailed it out of there, right?
Yeah.
Like, this is too much. I'm done. But he stuck it out. And part of that was he knew my mother. And he knew that I was going to need a friend, support, that kind of thing. He struggled. He struggled. We both struggled. But here's the thing, not only can you have an individual mask, emotional mask, as a couple, you can have emotional masks, right? And so it was a hot mess. Like, when we got married, it was like, we had lived together and then we got engaged. And when we got engaged, it's about time. And then we got married. And I feel like we did things because people expected us to do them. And that put us in this, at this point where I feel like I went along with everything. Um, he went along with everything, but he still was struggling with a lot of uh, thoughts about, is this really my life? Like, is this really what I want in my life? And it caused him to make some bad choices in his life,
Yeah.
which ended up coming to a culmination um, of an affair. And uh, we divorced, but we also reconciled very quickly after that.
Good for
Um,
you guys.
and I feel like the reason is because once I was healthier, I was no longer in fight or flight. I was able to start to see things clearly. I have um, a chapter in my book called Rose Colored Glasses. That's what I walked around with. I could not see in front of me what was negative. I chose not to. And so, even though he wasn't, he was having affairs on me, I didn't want to see it because everybody kept saying, "Oh, you guys are like the perfect couple. You've been together so long." And again, that's another emotional mask for both of us. We're like, "Oh, we're the perfect couple." Right? But he's struggling and I'm struggling. So it just wasn't healthy. It wasn't until the divorce happened, after I had therapy and we had therapy together, um, that we both realized that we had the foundation still of our friendship and a deep understanding of each other when everything was out on the table and we were able to be completely vulnerable enough to good, bad, or indifferent, put it all out there. And that's a scary, scary, scary place to be. But I tell you what, like when you're able to do that, it takes you personally to a different level, and it takes your relationship to a different level.
Yeah.
Um, but a lot of
Susan.
people don't want to see, you know what I mean? It's like
Yeah.
the rose colored glasses are just a more comfortable place to be.
The and we're getting up on top of that hour. I knew that was going to sneak up too fast. Because I feel like I have a list of things I want to know. Just because I'm relating, right? It's just me.
Yeah.
Like I can be like, hey, you know what? Because I listen, not to the scale that you have, but um, I've sat in the room with in fallen officer scenarios and just been in this scenario, and it's it moves me, and this conversation moves me, and I want to. I don't, and I told you that this is 100% my snafu where I got an appointment right behind this one, so I have to. Um, but what I would like to know, everything that you've been through, um, if you could go back and speak to that 17-year-old Susan on the day of that scene, or just shortly after your father's death, what would you tell her?
Oh my goodness. I would tell her that life is a journey and that it's not always going to be this way. It's you go through things, but it's not forever.
Yeah,
Um, I would tell her that everything that we do go through and we move through and we heal from makes you who you are.
yeah.
So don't be afraid.
That's because in my head I can't imagine it happening. Right? Is I kind of imagine that conversation taking place, and that's a um, that's a super powerful moment. How can people get in touch with you through your coaching, through your book? How can folks connect with you?
Sure. So, well, the book, just so you know, The Other Side of the Gun is available on Amazon. It is on paperback form and it's in Kindle form. Um, I am going to get into a studio and do an
Yeah,
audio version.
awesome.
Um, I do have an IG account. It's Susan underscore Snow one. I also have a website. If you're interested in doing some resiliency coaching with me, you can actually go onto my website, which is susansnowspeaks.com. It does have information on my speaking, and it also has some information about the book as well. So you can just kind of, check me out and see what I'm about. And I'm open to anyone. If anybody has questions, or maybe they're just starting their healing journey and um, they just need an ear. I'm here for that. My message is clear. It's very important for everyone to know that they're not alone.
Yeah,
And I am a listening ear. So if you want to contact me, that's the best way to do it.
I definitely recommend folks being on the other side of this, and not. Um, Susan and I are going to get back together so we can fill in some of the questions I have, because I want to I want to layer in a little bit for the audience of just how times were and how we've evolved. And now, not everything's PTSD. Now we use the word moral injury.
Yep.
And I'll send that some information that I've put out on just moral injury in itself. And the other thing that I really like to speak to when it comes to law enforcement is there's this stigma that people say that well, they knew what they were getting into when they took the job, and that's 100% the truth. But you don't know just how bad that it actually is when you get out there. That's when
Mm-mm.
you actually realize like how dangerous it is, how that erosion of society. Because I thought problems were going with the amount of money that we throw at problems and different things. I thought all that would be solved by now, and it has gotten just um, a 180 worse. Like it is crazy
Yep.
that what these folks have to deal with. But I'm going to wrap up and we're going to reconvene. I want to thank you.
Thank you.
You're that beacon of light that I wish I'd have found in 2007 during some of my own struggles. And you're that beacon of light that I'm really excited that I got to connect with you. And I'm really excited to just help amplify your message and your story because it's so important and it touches me and my family deeply as well. So I appreciate you coming on and just talking to me briefly. And I'm excited to where our conversation takes us in the future.
Sounds good. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, thank you. All right, group, we took a pause and we're back. And as we were wrapping up my episode with Susan Snow, I told her, I was like, I have a couple questions that I just I wanted to find some clarity in because I think it's important for the story that I just kind of pull this out and let everyone kind of know. And where I was kind of left at, Susan, and Susan's back with us today, episode 2. In the last 2.5 weeks or so, I have watched her social media come to life, and she's got these amazing reels and her speaking and her events. So make sure that if you're not following her, I'll make sure her link will be in our show notes. She's getting a lot of traction with that. So I wanted to be mindful for her time. But Susan, this is what a couple things I wanted to know. We talked a lot about you, and we should, and your journey through this because that was our focal point.
Mm-hmm.
But you had mentioned the day of the incident, your brother was in the vehicle with your dad,
Yes.
and how is he? How old is he now versus then? And then, what do you have any insight for what that was like on his side?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Well, yes. The last thing that my dad did on this earth was to save his life. And so he had a very different experience than I did. Um, but he was a little kid as well,
Yeah,
you know. Um, my brother, and I try not to talk for him just because it's his
yeah,
story and it's his journey. But what I can say is that growing up for him was not it was not easy, not having a father around. Um, he will just say that he chose a path that was not healthy
yeah,
for him. Um, and he made a lot of bad choices in his life, unfortunately. Um, but coming through all of that, I joke around with him all the time, and I say this all the time is he's my Hercules.
yeah.
He's and I don't say that it's just because everything that he's been through in his life, and he's had stacked trauma. Um, but he's also 6'2" and like almost 300 pounds. Um, so I can't say he's my baby brother, right? Because I'm 10 years older than him. Um, but he is just an amazing human being for what he's been through. And he's in his healing journey right now. He has been in and out of therapy for years.
Yeah.
Um, and honestly, because of the choices that he was making at an early age, I was not around for that. We had a very estranged
Yeah.
relationship. But you got to understand, like, I went from being a teenage girl to almost being a secondary parent.
Yeah.
And I was expected to be so. And
Yeah.
it was not easy. And he really struggled with coming out of this, with coming away from his guilt and his shame. And we've had many conversations about this. He and I have been healing our relationship for about 7 years now.
Wow.
And it wasn't an easy road. And to be quite honest, um, in writing my book and really having this journey myself, I realized that, when you do that, when you do the work, you start to see things clearly, and you start to have some realizations about the relationships in your life. And what I realized is that my mom and I's relationship was toxic from the start. Unfortunately, she has a narcissistic personality,
Yeah.
and it was very difficult to connect with someone like that. And my dad, when my dad was alive, I felt like he was the go-between. He was the voice of reason for me. And when he was killed, I lost that. And I didn't know, on top of all the other things I was dealing with, I didn't know how I was going to navigate that relationship. So I just did what I could. But what I realized is that, one, I was expected to be the secondary parent. So anytime my brother was going through anything, dealing with anything, making bad choices, it was the expectation of me that I would step in and I would be the voice of reason,
Yeah.
which I tried. But when you have someone that's, younger than you, and they're in fight or flight in their lives, and you're in fight or flight in your life, it's very difficult to be that 100% for that person. And that's what I struggled with. I tried to be the big sister, but at the same time, I saw the path that he was going down, and it was frustrating me. And I felt at the time that my mom enabled that behavior. But at the same time, on one end, she would enable it, and the other end, it was toxic for him too. And I didn't realize that until 7 years ago,
Yeah.
when we finally had a chat as adults, and we were able to kind of go back and work through some of the hurt and some of the frustration on both of our ends. And when my book came out, I had to sit down with my mom and be very, 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 very truthful with her.
Yeah.
And out of respect, I needed to let her know what was in the book. And I did. And I did it in a way that protected me by putting my boundaries down and not engaging in a toxic conversation with her.
Love it.
It was really interesting to me that when we first sat down, I told her, I said, in the 4.5 years that I wrote this book, you've never really asked me what I was writing about. There was no interest. And it wasn't until I actually was working with an editor, and she did ask me about it, and I said I was working with an editor. she said, "Oh, you're working with an editor?" And I said, "Well, but mom, like this is something I'm doing. This is my project for myself to not only heal me, but to try to help others. And I'm serious. Like this isn't a hobby." And I think she was just taken aback by
Yeah.
that. So when I finally knew that it was going to print, I said I have to have this conversation. And I
Yeah.
did. And I told her everything that I wrote in there was my experience. And I didn't vilify her in this book at all. Because honestly, everybody deals with trauma and loss differently. And some people choose self destructive type things to cope, such as drugs and alcohol and whatever, right? And I don't blame her for that, but there were consequences to her actions, to her choices. And that is what I wrote about, the experience behind the choices she made
Yeah.
and how it affected me. And I came out of that conversation feeling pretty good. Um, and as the book came out, I delivered it to her. I did write a note in it, a personal note that was from my heart. Um, just letting her know that we all go through this journey differently, and I've always loved her through hers. And I mean that. And I still mean that, even though after she read the book, she made the choice to end our relationship.
Ah.
And that's okay. I will say that I knew going into writing the book that this could be the outcome.
Yeah.
And it was a fear initially, but my message was more important to me to get out. The purpose of the people out there that needed to hear my words and hear hope and
Yeah.
healing was more important than the what ifs
Yeah.
part. And, so we are no contact, her choice. And I'm okay with it. I'm actually at peace.
Yeah.
And my brother understands, he still has a relationship with her. Um, but he understands where I'm coming from. So
No. Whew.
I know it's a lot.
Yeah, that's what I told you. Like, I wanted to. I was like on the day when we were in it. I was like, I need to know this, and because my curiosities, and that's the police
Yeah,
officer part, right?
of course.
We never leave that stone unturned, and
No.
then just full transparency. I think about what the butt chewing in the car as my wife listens to my episode. She's like, "Why didn't you ask this? What the heck? Why'd you interrupt her? You was right. You should." And I'm like, I got excited. I didn't. I had other
Oh
things.
my gosh.
Um. So that is it. I tell you. All right. So I'll preface this. With your brother, absolutely. I'd love to have him if he would wants to ever just come in and just it's as a safe space as it is. It's a public space, right? But I also have folks that have sat down with me and we have recorded some very vulnerable moments. And I have said, hey, when I'm done, I want to send this to you. And then if when you're ready for me to do anything with it, you send it back. Or you do what you'd like to with it. But I just feel like the conversation of you getting this off of your chest is super powerful. So he's more than welcome to connect with me and I'll make sure you have my number so he
I
can.
appreciate that.
Yeah.
I have had conversations with him um, about telling his story.
Yeah.
And
God dang. It's so powerful.
He
I
wouldn't
see.
write
Yeah.
it. And I told him, I said, look, that's the one thing that I could do is really sit down with him and write his story for him. Um, and I feel like it would be something that we could do together.
Yeah.
He's not at that point right now. Unfortunately for my brother, he has severe CPTSD
Yeah.
and he has visceral reactions to certain things. So I don't want to. I told him when he's ready, if, and I think he's getting there. I
Yeah.
think with me being out there and
Yeah.
telling my side of the story,
Yeah.
kind of like
Inspiring big sister, right?
anyone, I try to give him a safe space to say his story. And that's why I'm out here. That's why I'm out here, because I'm an extension, of him, as he is an extension of me, as far as like we're not the forgotten,
Mm-mm.
and I feel like for a long time he felt like that all the focus was on him. There was a lot of uh for him. I can tell you this, for him, he told me, like, I felt guilty because all of the focus was on me all the time. And I saw it one time where my dad actually was one of the first people to receive the Purple Heart
Mm.
when they started giving it to police officers who were killed in the line of duty. And I went to this, they gave it to us, he and I. Um, and we went to Los Angeles, and I had told him, and I had told my husband, I said, I am not doing any, because I have a love-hate relationship with media.
Yeah.
um I'm not doing any interviews. Like, I'm not doing it. I wasn't ready at the time. And he said, great, if you don't do any, I won't do any. And I said, great. So we received this Purple Heart in front of 400 people. And as you went outside, now my brother was in the middle of some not good choices at the time. So he was feeling very, very guilty in receiving it. And he broke down. So here I am trying to hold up a 6'2" man. And I took him off stage, and we went, as we opened the doors, we were right in the lion's den. It was all reporters who knew who we were, who knew our story. And we were approached by somebody who uh, painted a bill of goods. Let's just put it that way.
Yeah.
He was a local reporter, and he said, "Look, I just want to see the good. I just want to know. I want to put it out there. Like, what are all the good things that have come out of this terrible thing, right?" So I was like, being the positive person that I am, I was like, "Oh, well, that's different." And so I said, "Okay, I'll do the interview." And they asked my brother, and he said, "Well, if my sister does it, then I'll do it." And I said, "Okay." So we went and made a plan after the event that we would meet up somewhere. So we went down to Parker Center, where my dad's badge is in Parker Center outside in a big case with all the badges right by the memorial. And as he was starting to interview me, it was the total opposite.
Mm.
He wanted to take me back to that night. He wanted to know how I felt as a 17-year-old girl going through this. And I was like, this is exactly what I didn't want. And so every time he said something negative, I try to say something positive. Um, and then it was my brother's turn.
Mm.
And my brother was not feeling confident. So he did the interview with his back to the camera. And they did the exact thing to him. And he got very upset and
Yeah.
very emotional, obviously. And I walked away and I was just so angry. Now, here I am out here telling my story all the time. But
Yeah,
back
but look at
then,
what you've accomplished,
I
Susan.
was not,
Yeah,
I was
you were freaking in
not
a box.
there
Yeah,
yet. I wasn't there
yeah.
yet when this all happened. And
Susan,
that,
did the reporter know that? Like, we dealt with stuff differently back then, but and here we are coming in trying to get this amazing story, but you haven't dealt at this point in time, you guys have not dealt with nothing.
we had not, I mean, I had been in therapy and all that stuff, but I still was not at the point where I was comfortable going back there.
Yeah.
And especially going back there with a camera in my face.
Mm-hmm.
Um, like I am now. Like I'm fine now, but back then I was not feeling confident enough in my mental health to be able to do that.
Yeah.
And either was my brother by far. No, not at the least. So that night it aired and I didn't watch it. I got together with some friends in California since we were in town, and my brother was there. He came and he watched it and he was pissed
Yeah.
because they cut me out.
Mm.
They totally cut me out. And they put his interview in and not mine. And he was angry to the point where he called the news station and called that reporter and left a scathing message on his voicemail because once again, I was pushed aside. And this has been a pattern my whole life, which is why one of the reasons why I wrote this book, because people always had, like you, this question: what happened?
Yeah.
How did she fare? You know what I mean? And so and the other side of that is people were making up in their own heads my story. And a lot of the
Yeah.
time it was way different than who I am.
Yep.
So, um, yeah, I mean, it's always been a struggle for him. And I think, getting the book out and telling my side of the story, I think we both kind of felt a sense of relief that, you know, all those years, yes, I got pushed aside, but now it's my turn and people will really know the behind the scenes.
Yep.
And in doing that, the most important part of that is they can see that I'm okay,
Yeah.
that I'm still healing, that I've found resiliency, and um and he's moving towards it. It's ever evolving. Mental health and working and healing is ever evolving.
I never thought I would find as much. I had friends, right? But I never thought I would feel as good as I do when I tell my stories
Mhm.
and to strangers and in public and the negatives, the things that kind of sting or bite a little bit. So I would encourage for anyone who's listening, once you get to that place, and Susan's a great mentor and someone that has went probably years, until and she gets to have this moment now. And I say the term "kick the can," and I kicked the can for 5 to 7, maybe 8 years longer than what I should have because I was stuck in that moment and I thought it mattered and I thought people cared, and then I realized some of it was Some of it was just my own imposter syndromes and all the things because of your people you're around. And when you change those people out sometimes and you find those new influences of people that kind of pull those positives and, hey, this is something that happened. You can't do it. It's your fault. You can't help. It's life. It's things. And yeah, you screwed up or whatever that is. And wherever you're at, when you listen to what Susan's telling us here throughout our whole episode, and no matter where you are in the receiving side of this is, there's hope. And the folks I've talked to a couple other folks that just worked in trauma healing and things this week, and it's just powerful conversation after conversation of just how much help is out there.
Yep.
And I was curious, and you went down that road because I was curious about your mom's path and how that looked like. And you know, that's um as much as it's easy for me to say I hate that that's the way it is, I totally understand why that is. And
Yeah.
it's those boundaries and where I'm going with this is I worked a lot at the gym with women. Like I think I shared that with you as I own in the
Mm-hmm.
gym and working in women's empowerment and
Mm-hmm.
um a lot of folks they didn't know when I come in. They don't know I'm a product of a single mom. They don't know about that backstory, and they don't know why I'm passionate about, helping women find those goals and
Mm-hmm.
find that empowerment that they're looking for. And you hit it on the head with her is you had to put that boundary in
Mm-hmm.
to protect yourself. And a lot of people make that mistake, Susan, is they take that boundary down because they don't want to alienate. And that's you're taught at a really young age. You honor your mother and father and your
Yeah.
family first. And
Yes.
I've had some hard conversation with people that said with this whole family first thing you're following is what's driving you to all the uncertainties of your life. And if you just put a boundary in place,
Yep.
establish a boundary, and that boundary can stay there until you're ready to take it down. But if you
Right.
don't put something up, you're going to continue. You are going to continue to be in a bad place. So I think to speak to that, listening on to that side of it, but then knowing and how I dealt with my mom and my family and just different things that I have to do and still do today,
Mm-hmm.
um, is folks need to hear that. I want to make sure that they know that how much power that has given you through your
It
journey.
it absolutely has. I just heard something the other day, and it really resonated with me. And here's here's the thing: it is a lot easier to sit in your trauma because it's what you're used to, it's what you're comfortable with. It is a lot harder to move towards the healing part,
Yeah.
to do the work that needs to happen. And most people out there are terrified of doing that, right? So my message for people who are really scared, they're terrified of stepping out and starting to heal. What I can say is you have to do what's best for you. You If you dream one day that you want to wake up, I'll give you an example. I had a conversation with a lady and I said to her, "What is the one thing that you want to do through healing through your trauma? What is the one thing that you want to do?" And she said, "Susan, I would want to wake up and just smile."
Mhm.
And that was so powerful because maybe that is for what you want. If you just want to wake up and feel joy and not be anxious and not feel guilt or shame or fear, like how powerful would it be for you to be able to wake up one day and just smile? Because you know that you're on a journey of healing and that you are going to feel better one day. And there are going to be good days and there are going to be bad days, and that's okay. That's important, actually. That's a part of the healing, is being able to sit in your emotions for a short amount of time, not forever, but just allowing yourself to feel the emotions that you feel. That's okay. That's healthy, actually. And it's important. So when I heard that, I was just like, wow, it just brought me back to that one conversation, because I was just like, yeah, this woman was starting her healing journey and she was terrified. But her purpose was to be able to wake up one day and have a smile on her face.
Dr. Elizabeth Pritchard last night works in women's leadership, and she does some neuro, um, oh gosh, I can't think of the exact name there, but she's real,
Neuro-linguistic programming,
a little
NLP.
bit. Yeah,
Uh-huh.
she's good. There's another term she used, but real good on connecting head and body, heart, brain and body, head and
Uh-huh.
heart, that
Okay.
kind of work. This is what we were talking. I told her that how impactful her work is, and just what
Mm-hmm.
it means to the public, like just to me in public safety community, and just how we're approaching things different. This is what she said. Second Chance podcast, right? She said, Jeff, we give ourselves a second chance first.
Yep.
We give everybody else a second chance. Like you always, like you're quick to give people a second chance. She's
Yep.
like, sometimes we don't give ourselves that second chance fast enough. Forgiveness of yourself, things along those lines, not having it be your fault. Um, yeah, you know, somebody, we always hear the term taking ownership. It's okay to push some of that. It ain't your fault. It's okay to push some
Right.
of that off. How did I got a couple other things I was going to ask you?
Mm-hmm.
How was the department? I can probably paint a picture of how the initial was,
Mm-hmm.
but how did that? And what I want folks to know how powerful that law enforcement community is, and how they'll wrap their arms around, and brotherhood, sisterhood, and it's a family because you do a lot of stressful things together. So there's a connection.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and when you go through an event like you all have, how was the department's engagement with you all initially, and then how did that look like as time went on, even up till today?
Oh my, where do I start? Well, again, initially all of the focus was on Ryan, my brother. Um, he was about to turn 7 when my dad was killed. So, um, I'll give you a visual. The day of his brother, my mom and my dad had planned to buy him a bike,
Mm,
and he didn't know how to ride a bike. So the plan was that my dad was going to teach him how to ride a bike on his birthday, on his 7th birthday. And um, he got the bike, and there was probably about 40 different detectives and police officers that showed up on his birthday, and we had a party for him, and there were a boatload of police officers running down the street following my brother on his bike.
yeah,
um so he had all of these surrogate dads that were helping him ride, learn how to ride a bike. And it was like that. um it was, for me, back then, and I've had conversations recently, back then there wasn't a lot of real support systems for children. most of the emphasis was on the spouse. There was like advocacy, advocacy groups and widows, concerns of police survivors, like, and my mom ended up getting very much involved in that. Um, but there wasn't a lot, and so that was part of my struggle. The therapist that they paid for me to go to, that was a struggle. Um, and so honestly, back then, there just wasn't a lot. There wasn't a lot of support. There is now. They've learned through the years that it's just as important to support the children
Yeah.
as it is the spouse. But back then it was not. Um, as far as the department, I grew up with these guys, and um, so I would periodically, my dad's end of watch page, there would be people that still to this day post on that, which blows my mind. Um, I did keep in touch with the main detective on my dad's case. He was a family friend prior to my dad's death. And he's actually the one that wrote my foreword in my book.
What was his name?
Mike Thies, Detective Mike Thies. Um, he retired, but he always stayed in touch. Not with me as much, but with my mom until he did the foreword for my book. he he and his wife has always they were very proud of me for doing this book.
Yeah.
Um, he always saw it too. He always saw the me being pushed aside. Um, and he recognized that. And we have some great stories of before my dad was killed and some interactions that we had, and how he literally saved my life with my mother, or with my dad in San Diego. I took a boat out too far.
Yeah.
Um, but he's always stayed in touch. Um, just checking in on me. And I was honored to be able to, he runs a breakfast for retired LAPD and LA County Sheriff. And so, July of 2023, I was able to go out to California, and I was able to speak at this breakfast. There was probably about 20
Whew.
people there.
Yeah.
And I got to hear some incredible stories of people who worked with my dad, who knew my dad. They were so excited to have me there. I felt so much love. Um, and just hearing the stories about who he was, I knew who he was as a father, but to
Yeah.
hear who he was at work
Yeah.
with his colleagues, with people he trained with or trained, um, it was such an honor. It was such an honor. I was so grateful for that time. And Mike always wants to know everything that I'm doing. I'm sending him podcasts. I'll probably send him this one.
Yeah. Yeah. Please do.
um and he really enjoys it.
Awesome.
Last September, I don't know if I told you this, but last September, I think, coming full circle for me, I was invited by the Police Protective League for Los Angeles, for LAPD.
You mentioned, I think it's when you closed for the other fella.
Yes.
Yeah, you were you closed for the
Yes.
yeah
Yeah.
yeah.
And I
But
was,
but yeah, keep going.
yeah, I
Because
mean,
we didn't get to talk about that a lot.
that was an incredible experience for me because most of these people were not on they were not on the force when my dad was on the
Yeah,
force. So they knew the story. They hear it usually when they're in the academy.
yeah.
Um, but to hear the story, they put two and two together. I'm up there standing, they're telling the story, and I could see the brains putting two and two together. But um, there were some officers that were there that had been on the force while my dad was on the force and after the fact, who either worked the trial detail, because we had actually two trials, um, or they worked the funeral because it was huge. And so they could tell me their story, and they're observing, what they observed and how they felt about everything. And after I spoke, I mean, I got a chance to sit down on a couch with some other police officers who started telling me their stories
Yeah.
and their traumas. And I was able to have some very deep conversations with them, and I was very grateful for it. My husband was exhausted.
All right.
He was like, "I don't know how you do this," and I said, "Because I'm in my purpose."
Yeah.
And the next day after that incredible day, I was able to listen to the then chief of police. And what he was saying to his officers was that he did want to make mental health a priority for them. He did want to, clean up the stations because they hadn't been remodeled in so long and their equipment was falling apart, and all the things that are important for somebody to be able to do their job at a high level and keep their safety in check. So he was saying all the things that gave me some optimism when it came to the police, uh, to LAPD. And then after he came off stage, I went to go introduce myself, and he already knew who I was,
Ah.
which blew my mind. But he also knew who my dad was. And
Had the chief worked with your dad, Susan, or is he from outside?
in some sort of way,
Yeah. What
he
was his
did.
name?
Michael Moore.
Michael Moore. All right,
Mm-hmm.
I'll look it up. Just my
Yeah.
own curiosity. You'll get the best of me.
Right.
I'll look up.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So yeah, he's no longer the chief. He stepped down. They have a new one, but and I'm hopeful. I think that he had some good ideas and some, he was opening a conversation about mental health in law enforcement, and that was an important conversation. Um, but when in talking to him, the first thing he said to me was he wanted to tell me that he saw for himself me being pushed away, pushed
mm,
into the side. And he acknowledged that. And my husband and I looked at each other and went, "What? What?" No one has ever said that to me other than Mike Thies. And so it kind of blew my mind. I think I stood there. I didn't know what to say other than like, thank you for acknowledging that. Um, but the biggest thing that he did, and the most incredible thing he did, is he gave me a gold medallion. Excuse me, a gold medallion, and he said it was the medallion of honor that he gives to people, and has his name on it, has the insignia for the badge for Los Angeles Police Department. And he said, "I want you to have this, and I want you to know that you'll never be forgotten." And you need to know that even though you were pushed aside many years ago, you will never be forgotten. And I, at that point, lost it. My husband
Mm.
lost it, and we had to leave. um, but
Because
I'm
he
so
probably,
grateful
because
for
he,
that
the
moment.
chief probably has no clue, does he, Susan? Like
Oh,
he's
he had
saying
no
that,
idea.
but
When he
he
said
not to
that, I
this
lost
extent,
it.
right?
I
Yes.
bolted out of the room.
Yeah, he
Um,
doesn't. He heart. All his intentions are well placed, but he doesn't know the
no,
backstory
he
of where
doesn't.
Susan
So
is.
that's why I became very emotional. My husband
Yeah.
became very emotional,
Ooh,
and we had to
ooh.
leave. We had to leave. I mean, I think we sobbed in the hallway for like felt like forever. Um, because my husband feels it. He knows it. He's been with me through this entire journey. And so for him to see that and be a part of that and that experience, it was absolutely incredible in that. So and you know and having the experience in July, did I tell you about my experience in July about going back to the school? You don't
No,
remember.
maybe not. Go ahead. Even if it's a repeat, it's worth it.
All
Tell me
right.
again.
In July, when I went back and I spoke in front of the retired
Mhm.
officers,
Yeah.
at the end of that trip, we went and visited my dad, and he was kind of a mess. So we cleaned him up and had conversation with him. And I just, told him how grateful I was for that journey, for this journey, and that I'm doing the work that he wants me to do and has been kicking my butt for years to do. And I had talked to my husband about going back to the school because in LA, they put placards up on the streets where officers were killed in line of
Yeah.
duty. I don't know if it's like that everywhere, but that's what they decided to do. My dad's placard is on the front side of the school. He was killed on the back side of the school. And I wanted to see this placard. Now, I had seen it in the past,
You hadn't told me this.
but I
Just so
was
you know.
sick
This.
as I was seeing it. I was so anxious, like coming out of my skin anxious. So this time I was like, it was almost a litmus test for me. I wanted to see what this writing of this book did for me personally. So we went to the school and we found it, and I took pictures and everything, and I felt peaceful. In fact, I didn't even have any anxiety even pulling up to the school, which was something I had never experienced. So we were taking pictures, and in my brain, I said, how far can I take this? So without telling my husband, I just said, I have one more place we need to go before we leave. And he was like, oh, okay, no problem. And I was driving. So we got in the car and we started driving up the street in front of the school to the school that connects the front of the school and the back of the school. And as I started to turn right, my husband looked at me and said, what are you doing? And I said, just give me a minute. And I drove up to the street behind the school. I made a right. I went up the street. I turned the car around and I parked. And I proceeded to describe everything I saw that night to my husband. And as I was sitting there, I was completely at peace.
Mm.
And we both looked at each other, and I became emotional because for the first time in my life, I felt proud of myself.
Yeah.
Like, holy cow, look where I'm at. I didn't think I would ever be able to do that. And he said, oh my God, we've come full circle.
Yeah.
And I said, yeah. And it was important for him to be with me in that moment because he was with me that night.
Yeah.
And it was crazy. And I drove off and I thought to myself, my wish for my brother would be that he would be able to do the same. And I would be so honored if I would be able to be there with him,
Yeah.
because I was not able to be there that night. And um, it was just an incredible experience. And it's a testament to anyone out there that no matter what you go through, if you allow your fear to make you sit in your trauma and not do anything about it, you are taking something away from yourself. Because the life that you can have if you do the work and when you do the work is experiences like I had. And the human mind is one of the most incredible organs. And what you can teach your mind to do is amazing. But fear is always the thing that gets in the middle. And like I tell everybody, like the only way I got through fear was to put purpose in front of me. So what is that for you? Is that a better life for your children? A better life for yourself? A career that you dreamed of? But because you've gone through the things that you've gone through and you haven't done the work, you don't feel like you'll ever be able to attain that. Um, and that, and that's my message to people is, you have to make you the priority. And when you do the work, when you step out of yourself and you really start to heal, the opportunities that you can seek are so much more. Shoot, I don't know where that came from. Holy cow. When I
First
say
time
this is bigger than myself, I'm telling you, it is definitely bigger than
you
myself.
were, I'll make sure I send you the video. I need let you and your husband watch you were very, like, it's a powerful moment, man. Um, I'm, I'm glad we connected. And
Me too.
I feel like there's just it's like I have with everybody. No meetings by chance. Even the internet allows me to meet you a little faster, and we're fortunate to be a part of that age to where we are able to make these just connections like we do. And um, if you follow those big speakers, we plan these conversations and our with the higher power at some point in time, and we're just here executing a plan that we said we was going to do.
Absolutely.
And your mission that you've took on now, and me too. I hope that you'll find yourself even a little more pissed off that you didn't get to where you were
Mm-hmm.
until now, even though it's part of the plan.
Yes.
But I find myself sometimes going, "Oh, I could have done so much more. I could have
Yes.
helped so many more people." But we're where we are, and
Right.
your message is landing at the proper time and when it's supposed to, and you're impacting the lives that need to be through your story. And I
Yes.
hope through your story of the thousands, Johnny Savage, good friend of mine, I'd love to connect you guys. He's
Mm-hmm.
just amazing story. He has some just amazing stuff, and he's he's really helped me on a lot of my journeys just through my conversations and different things of just
Mm-hmm.
about purpose and people and where we all kind of end up at, um, and he's kind of right there as somebody who's came into my life at the right time, kind of like yourself,
Yeah.
right? And through all of these people and just kind of molding these conversations together, his whole goal is like, if I can just help one person,
Yeah.
he's helped thousands, but
Yeah.
in his head, he's like, if I can just
Yep.
help one, and
Totally get that.
yeah,
Every time I'm standing on a stage, that's my thought. If I can
yeah,
get to one person out there, I've done my job. And my biggest goal is to be in front of 10,000 people at some point.
oh, you'll hear a story. Let me tell you a story. So that's my goal.
Nice.
Um,
People think
and
we're nuts, just so you know.
no, I'll connect you to my wife. I did a little stand up comedy, right? So if you want to get good speaking reps in, this is totally off subject, so hit pause or fast. But if you want to learn how to be a good speaker, stand up comedy and open mic nights it's very impromptu and at the end of the day, you don't have to make anyone laugh. So we're out back a couple of years ago, and my wife's like, "Well, what do you want to do?" So I'm like, I want to speak in front of, I've got this goal and I got this story and I had this amazing, I just want to put it out there, man. And she's like, "Well, what do you want to do?" I'm like, "I want to speak in front of 10,000 people." She said, you know what? I'm going to speak in front of 10,000 people." And she says, "Look," she goes, "That's a really good goal, Jeff. Why don't you try speaking in front of five?" So
I get that. Yeah.
So every time I opened up in front, like when I did comedy, people like that was my first laughs.
Mm-hmm.
That was my opener. I was like, "Hey, this stuff's not gonna be funny. I'm just trying to get some stage reps in." Told my wife I want to speak in front of 10,000 people, just like a kind, loving wife she is. She told me, "Why don't you try to speak in front of five?"
Yeah.
And they laughed. And as soon as you get those first laughs from comedy, oh, it's such a powerful moment. So
Yeah.
then it just take it. So when you same goal, we'll get there. You're going to get there way before I do.
Yeah,
Um,
I believe in the power of timing.
yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
I think that, I'm building up my street cred, so to speak, by being on all these podcasts,
Yeah,
just getting my name out there, getting my face out there and everything. But, it's just having the book and it's been a journey with
yeah,
that, just, I published it myself and I didn't use, a publisher or anything like that. And so all the marketing I do is all me, a
yeah,
100%. And it's done pretty well for being a self-published book. But, I think the most important thing for me is the connection. And I'm
yeah.
the type of speaker that I like to look into people's eyes.
Mm,
Um, I like to be able to connect. And when I'm able to connect with somebody, when I can see the wheels turning in someone's head, I know that I'm making a difference. And I think that's such an important thing for me.
yeah,
Um and I just, I feel like we're all given these things, right? We're all given situations in our life. And I feel like even though as horrible as it is, and I used to say this and people would be like, "What?" Um my purpose was in my dad's death and my dad's purpose was in my dad's death. Meaning that we both there were positive things that came out of something so horrible
yep,
and there were lessons to be learned. And um it made me who I am today.
yep,
So I'm not saying that it should have happened. I'm not saying that I don't miss my father because I do every day of my life. But I also feel like I'm doing his work. And continuing on and changing that legacy from being a negative to becoming a positive for my
Yeah.
children, for my future grandchildren. Um, that's what's important to me. So,
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, and
I
you're
think you're
right. I
spot
will
on with
get
that.
on those stages.
Yeah, you will.
I will. It will happen. I have some goals set for 2025,
Yeah,
and so I really want to work on that, and coaching is really important to me as well.
should be because you're really for me you're very relatable.
Mm.
And if and you're relatable because of the industry that I got to work in, and I know the thousands upon thousands. But you can, it's like I tell a lot of folks that come out of law enforcement that talk to me and get my input on something. I go, as much as it's relatable to law enforcement and public safety, there's a
Oh
bridge.
gosh, yeah,
And just it applies to every
everyone.
aspect, and yeah,
If
there's
you're
people that are
human,
yeah, and
it
you're
should
right. You're
apply.
Yeah, always. I used to live in that anger of why this was happening to me, or why did I screw this up, or why did this happen, and then I really learned about that power of the moment. And
Mm-hmm.
Eckhart Tolle was a book that someone had turned me on to, and it's just about when you're in those moments of what's life trying to teach you.
Mm-hmm.
What's your purpose? What are you trying to learn? And kind of like as you're talking and minding your conversations, and then as you went on, I was like, oh, wait a minute, this is a little bigger than this is a little bigger than little second chance podcast, right? This is a story that needs to be amplified, and I feel that, and I absolutely know in my without a doubt. Like I said, your stuff comes up and I hear your speaking and your flows, and you've just got some solid stuff. You got your book, which is going to lead the way for you. Here's what I wanted to tell you, and I want to tell everyone else this as we close. All right,
Okay.
and I wanted to give you just a nugget. Your advice on that writing that your coach and your therapist had gave you, the writing that doesn't work for me. And I struggled. And I was thinking about that. And I'm glad this came up about your brother because this is my out. I love video. I love sitting down in front of YouTube. I love getting on a podcast. I love talking. And so this is why as I started getting going on my thing, I was like, oh, I just get to have conversations. And every now and then I can talk about me. And so I really enjoy that, and what I learned is just how I like to communicate. And your brother, that may be that encouraging thing is just say, look, you don't have to write a book.
Right.
You might find sitting down and videoing or starting a podcast or and I'm not suggesting this because I'd love to have him on here. If this is where he ends up, is where he ends up. But just have people are listening here, I've been encouraged. Jeff, write a book, man. You should write a book. You got that's a good story. You should write a book. And I'm
That
like,
is
yeah, man,
so
that sounds
wonderful.
great. I'd love to do it. Yeah, I'm like, I'd love to write a book. And then I'm like, but I'm more of a vocal.
Yeah.
Um, so keep that in mind. And
This is your journaling, by the way.
yeah, right. Yes, this is my journaling.
That's your
Uh,
journaling.
and
And that's what I
I
said. Everybody journals differently, right?
yes,
Some people
yeah,
write, some people do music,
yep.
some people
So do
are
art.
artists,
Yeah,
right? So, you find whatever you can do to get all of the stuff swirling
yeah.
out of your head, right? So, yeah, absolutely. I
My friends would be
100%
like,
agree
Jeff
there.
just likes to talk. That's why he does that. He just likes to talk.
No,
Susan, and I think we closed with that, but closing again, man. I'm not going to close this because I feel like in a couple weeks I'm going to say, hey, I need to ask you something, and you're going to come back on here. But I want you to know that you got um, the support and anything we can do from my camps to help you mentor, whatever that looks like. Is I want to make sure that you know that, and for the folks that are listening, you There's not an episode that I don't say, well, you should like, share, and comment. No, 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 no. You know someone who's struggling, especially that female, that lady who's been through a lot of hell, who's putting themselves through necessary.
Mm-hmm.
But at the end, is it's all that purpose and stuff. And make sure you connect them with Susan. You can. I'm going to. It'll all be in the show notes. Um, and I just can't thank you enough. Can't thank you enough for your dad's service and the connection that he and I have through law enforcement and through yourself as well. And I'm excited for where our friendship continues to evolve. And when we're on that stage in front of 10,000 people someday, we'll kind of wink at each other, remember this moment. So,
Absolutely.
yeah, thank you for
100%.
giving me, yeah, thank you for giving us a little more time today.
Oh, thank you for having me. I appreciate it immensely.